Yom Shlishi by Shabbos is Tuesday to Gimel SHVAT. Today's the Yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara. She was a Polish. The Rebbetzin Shterna Sara's father was a Polish Gutanid. The Rebbetzin Shterna's father was the Tzemach Tzedek's son, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. But he was a Rebbe in Avruch. Avruch is the Ukraine, and he wasn't the derech of Chasidei Poland. It's very hard to figure out what happened, but the deal is that Motla Chernobyl's son, Rebbe Rashab, married the Mittler Rebbe's daughter. Mittler Rebbe had 7 daughters and 2 sons. Tzemach Tzedek had 7 sons and 2 daughters. And that's, by the way, that's besides for the children who died in infancy. The Mittler Rebbe may have had 12 or 13 or 14 children. I mean, I know of 2 other children that we know as a matter of fact that the Mittler Rebbe had that are not included in the cheshbon of 9. Because children that died in infancy, they didn't gerechnet afila. They found in Lubavitch a matzeve from a girl named Esther Miriam. The Mittler Rebbe had a daughter named Esther Miriam. We didn't know this is an 8th daughter. Apparently she passed away young, and we don't even count her. The Mittler Rebbe had 2 daughters by the same name, Sara. The oldest was Sara and the youngest was Sara. And they're both counted because the oldest Sara grew up and got married and passed away, and they named her younger sister after her. But the Rebbe Rashab married one of the Mittler Rebbe's daughters, and he came to live in Lubavitch by the Mittler Rebbe. And Chabad didn't touch him klal. I just think of Rebbe Rashab as being a very, very strong personality. He knew the Alter Rebbe yet. He learned in Lajne by Malten Rebbe. He married the Mittler Rebbe's daughter in Tov Kuf Ayin. And he lived in Lajne for a couple of years by Malten Rebbe. Then later he was by the Mittler Rebbe in Lubavitch. And Chabad didn't touch him klal. On the other hand, his daughter married the Tzemach Tzedek's son, was a second shidduch, Rebbe Yitzchak, and he was very much affected by his shver. You know, the beginning of the story is like you have in the Sikha. The Rebbe told the story many times. That Mukatcher told his son-in-law that you have to daven b'tzibur. No arichas atfila. I don't like arichas atfila if daven with a minyan. So Rabbi Mukatcher told his shver, quote, "Ich bin sich mishtadel daven b'tzibur. I make every effort to daven b'tzibur." And he davened for many hours. So the Shekasa says to his son-in-law, "You told me you daven b'tzibur." He says, "Yeah, what does tzibur mean? To gather together all of the different sparks." He says, "I tried to daven and gather together all the different parts of myself, and it takes a lot of time." But later on, upon him, he became a Polish Rebbe. I heard from people, I never saw this in print, that he tried to be a Chabad Rebbe in Avruch, and it was like talking to the wall. The Polish Yidden, the Volner Yidden, had no chushin. Rosh Chassidus. Rosh Chassidus is very Litvish Chassidus. It's very scholarly, very intellectual. Bottom line is he was a Polish Gutanid. And his daughter married the Rebbe Rashab. There's a whole Arichas HaSipur. These 2 families intermarried 3 times in a row. There's Chernobyl and Lubavitch. Rebbe Rashab married the Mittler Rebbe's daughter. That shidduch produced, I think her name was Deveda Leah, who married the Cherkasses, who married Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. I could be wrong. One of the Tzemach Tzedek's sons married a daughter of the Cherkasses. It wasn't the Leah. I stand corrected. The Cherkasses' daughter married Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, and then their daughter, Rebbetzin Shterna Sara, married the Rebbe Rashab. So she came from a Polish Rebbe Shemishpacha. She married into a Chabadski Rebbe Shemishpacha. But here she was at the age of 14 years old, away from home. That's the story. Because there was a big discussion about their shidduch. Their tnoim were made in the lifetime of the Tzemach Tzedek. They were engaged at the age of 4 years old. There's a document, the shtar tnoim, the legal document of tnoim for the Rebbe Rashab and his Rebbetzin Shterna Sara was made by Chayv and Tzemach Tzedek. And in the shtar it's written that the wedding, that each one of the tzaddim would give 1,000 ruble. That means the Rebbe Rashab had to give 1,000 ruble, and the Avruch had to give 1,000 ruble, and on the bottom it's written in Ksav Yad Kochif and Tzemach Tzedek, I am also pledging to give 500 ruble to the chasana. And they wrote in the Tnoim, as they did in many Rebbe Shechasnas, Chasana Yeh B'Shal Teva L'Tlachas B'Yerushalayim Irakedesh. or wherever the two sides will decide. So 10 years later, they made a chasana. 9 years, they got married Lamadalit. Rebbe Rashab got married Lamadalit. Summer, Ella Lamadalit. 1774. The Rebbe Rashab was Sachakel. He was almost 14. He wasn't yet 14 years old. How old was the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara? Maybe a drop older, but not much. Very, very young. And the Avruch wanted the chassan to be an Avruch. So the Rebbe Marash says, it says in the Sharp Noim that the chassan is going to be in Yerushalayim. Lubavitch is Yerushalayim. And Avruch says, Lubavitch is no longer Yerushalayim. So Tzaddik had passed away. This was the big vikuach. So there's a Frierdike Loshna, Flam Frierdike Loshna. I told this to you before that the Rebbe Marash said to his Mukatcher, Ich gib dir an Eden. I'm giving you a son-in-law. Was leyemchu pasay is arene ve'Yankov Avinu. He's going to his chuppah pure than Yankov Avinu went to his chuppah, and you're arguing with me about Tzadakala. The bottom line is the wedding did take place in Avruch. The Rebbe Marash did not go to the wedding. He gave the Rebbe Rashab instructions not to wear a shtreimel by the chasana. He said a shtreimel trucks to none on Lubavitch. And he sent along a special messenger because he knew that the Avrucha would put the shtreimel on the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe Rashab was 14 years old, you understand? He's going to fight with his Mukatcher. His Rebbe was a tzaddik Elyon, he was going to argue with him. He sent along a special shliach that when the Avrucha would put a shtreimel on the Rebbe Rashab's head, he should take off the shtreimel and put it back on the hat. So the Avrucha should have prepared 2 shtreimels. He only prepared 1. Kachav, in the middle of the chuppah, the Avrucha took off the Rebbe Rashab's hat and he put on the shtreimel, and the shliach ran over, took away the shtreimel, put on a different hat. But right after Sheva Brachas, he came to Lubavitch. This was the agreement. So imagine a girl, with Rebbe Mishpacha, very pure, very holy, 14 years old, away from home. It was very difficult for her. It was very, very difficult for her. There's a Santa Vort I saw someplace. She was short. She was little. She was petite. Everybody in the Rebbe Marash's house was tall. And she was very self-conscious. So the Rebbe Marash once saw her and sensed her displeasure, her self-consciousness. And he told her, Zog sich nicht. Kleine Beime, gib ihm gute Frucht. Don't feel bad, the short trees produce the sweetest fruit. She was the mother of the Frierdike Rebbe. Rebbetzin Shterna Sara. She didn't get pregnant right away. And this also bothered her very much. And there's a story which she would tell later, which is mamish, the repetition of history. The same story happened with her mother-in-law and the Rebbe Rashab, happened with her and the Frierdike Rebbe. It was Simchas Teireh, Tafkuf Mem, Tafresh Mem. She was sitting in shul, and she was married now more than 5 years. And remember, it's not easy to be married to a Rebbe. I mean, the Rebbe Rashab was day and night worked. How much time do you think the Rebbe Rashab spent with his Rebbe? She was away from home, and her husband was an oivid. The Rebbe Rashab was the way Rebbe Rashab broke himself for Avodas Hashem is literally indescribable. And she was lonely. And she was sitting in shul Simchas Teireh, and she saw everybody coming with their children, and she started to cry. And in shul she fell asleep and she had a dream. I forgot the details of the dream, but the bottom line is somebody in a dream told her that she should give 24 ruble to tzedakah from her own money, which was a considerable amount of money, and she'll have a good son. I have from a good source that she was already pregnant. She didn't realize it. The Frierdike was born Yebes Tammuz. She was already pregnant, but she was only pregnant a few weeks. She didn't know she was pregnant yet, and she had so many miscarriages. The Rebbe Shterna Sara, they printed, I saw in a Maimer, a pan that the Rebbe Marash wrote. The Rebbe Marash, her father-in-law, wrote up in Tzemach Tzedek, where he writes to the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, she's bleeding, and that she had a number of miscarriages, and he's davening that this pregnancy she should stop bleeding, and that she should be healthy, and that she should see the baby through the pregnancy through till the end. And Kachava, the Frierdike was born. So she had this dream where she sees different people, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek. I don't remember the Piratim, and I don't want to guess because I'm going to guess wrong. And one of them told her you should give 24 ruble to tzedakah from your own money. That day, it was Simchas Teireh. So when the Rebbe Rashab came home, he didn't walk into the house. He somersaulted into the house. And he was B'simcha Rabbe, and he gets up from his somersault and he sees that his wife is very serious. So he tells her, why are you so serious? It's Simchas Teireh. So she tells him about the story and the dream. And they went right away to the Marash. And the Marash said, I think he said, Achalem Tev, Navzen, you should do it. It's a good dream, you should fulfill it. But where did she get 24 ruble of her own money? She had a pelts. She was given for her wedding a fur. So she pawned it, and she got 24 ruble, and she gave to Tzedakah, and she would tell the story when Yanim Yar Bestu Gebarim Gebarim. The Frierdike was born that year, Yud Bes Tammuz, the Frierdike was born Tafresh Mem. This is the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara. She was the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe Rashab. She was the mother of the Frierdike Rebbe. She always traveled with the Rebbe Nishmasei. The Rebbe Rashab was sick a lot, and she was constantly with her husband. The Frierdike Rebbe was raised to a great degree by his grandmother, because his mother and father, when he was young, were not around. She traveled with the Rebbe Rashab. And one of the most interesting things I think about the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara's life is the Rebbe Rashab went through a period of a lot of stress, emotional stress, inner stress, deep stress. He spent almost a year in Vienna. And he met Sigmund Freud, Kiyadua. And the Frierdike Rebbe said, I knew nothing of it, but he shared everything with my mother. The Rebbe Rashab's confidant was the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara, which says an awful lot about her. Don't kid yourself. The Rebbe Rashab confided in his Rebbetzin, in his pneumius it was avoided struggles. There were very pneumiistic issues that the Rebbe Shterna was having, and he shared them with his Rebbetzin, with the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara. When the Rebbe Rashab was nostalgic, she was now the mother of the Frierdike Rebbe. And the Fanavort I saw in Simcha Gorodetsky has a biography, very short, but it's printed in a sefer called Yadas Admama. It goes back 20 years, Mr. Simcha Gorodetsky was a Tomim in Lubavitch, and he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. I think he had what was the equivalent to Yena Machla. He had typhoid fever, which was a contagion, and it was a death sentence. And the yeshiva sent him home to die. They couldn't do anything for him. So he said to the yeshiva, I can die here just as well I can die at home. I'll die in Tem Chatvimim, it's fine. The Rebbe Rayatz heard about this comment, this statement, that he can die in Tem Chatvimim just as well as he can die at home. He's going to stay in yeshiva. He was very moved by that. So the Frierdike Rebbe called him in, and he told him, since you're sick, you can't learn, I'll make you my shliach. The man lived into his 80s. I mean, that's the end of the story. It's a Maisa Shahoya Kachaya. He says, I can die in Tem Chatvimim. So the Frierdike Rebbe says, you can't learn because you're dying. I'll make you a shliach. And he died for 80 more years, 60 more years. Malach Yom of Simcha Gorodetsky. And he became the Frierdike Rebbe's shliach. And the result of this was, he was one of the early shluchim in the early 1920s. Him and Rebbetzin Shem Tov, and there were a couple more. Their mission was reconnaissance. They went all over Russia, seeing what's going on. And they didn't have one piece of good news. It was rotten news. Wherever they went was tzaddis. Rabbanim being arrested, Rabbanim running away from the position, shuls being closed, mikvahs being closed, chadarim being closed. And when he came back and he reported back to the Frierdike Rebbe, every piece of news that he would give, the Frierdike Rebbe Pasha burst into tears and sob and sob and sob and sob and sob, stop crying and say, okay, next. And at a certain point, he wanted to Pasha walk out of the Yechidus. And he couldn't see the Rebbe cry anymore. And the Frierdike Rebbe says, people made you a shliach to give me messages. He stood 6 hours by the Rebbe, giving the Rebbe one piece of bad news after another. Each piece of news, Rebbe Tzachfananda gemeint, finished crying and said, continue. When he walked out of Yechidus, he looked like a man who had come back from the underworld. He was completely shattered. The Rebbetzin Shterna Sara sees him. His mother, Frierdike Rebbe, who raised him. And she looks at him and says, Simcha, what happened? So he tells her what happened. He stood 6 hours by the Rebbe. He gave the Rebbe one piece of bad news after another. Each shtickle, Rebbe Tzachfananda gevein, and the Rebbe refuses to let him leave and says, people made you a shliach. So she says to him, I don't know what happened to him. She says, I know that I raised him. He says, every night after Yechidus, under his chair there's a puddle of tears. Under his chair there's a puddle of tears. When the Nocha van Atzveite Lashon, she told Simcha Gorodetsky, Ich bin doch Eishes Chavek Yechavek. I am Eishes Chavek. I'm wife of the Rebbe Rashab, so I'm a Rebbetzin, I'm a Rebbe. Oh, but macht good. He's doing good. In other words, even though she claimed, I am the previous generation. I'm the wife of the Rebbe, so I'm the Rebbe Rashab, so in effect I'm a Rebbetzin, and I'm a generation closer. He said, oh, but macht good. In other words, she recognized that her son was the Rebbe. When they arrested the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdike Rebbe, she was asleep. It was the middle of the night. And he warned them, if you're going to make noise, you're going to wake up my mother. And if you're going to wake up my mother, you're going to have tzaddas. And they made noise, and they woke up his mother, and it was a big, big mess. Because she became absolutely hysterical. She just lost it. She started screaming. Maybe she was acting, but whatever the case was, she started screaming. She was screaming to the Rebbe Nishma, who had passed away 6-7 years before. Cook for the nem dein Sohn. Dein Sohn, the tzaddik. Cook for the nem dein Sohn. She said to the Russians, take me. Don't take my son. He's a tzaddik. He's innocent. He's a holy man. Take me. And she became pashat hysterical. And the Rebbe turned to the Russians and says, I warned you. He says, if you allow me, I'll take her to the other room and I'll quiet her down. So they allowed him. And understandably, as soon as the door closed, he didn't quiet her down. He gave her instructions. This was the one moment that the Frierdike Rebbe had alone, right under their noses, where he was able to save us Mizaltan. And this was a very big nest. It turned out to be a big nest. Naturally, when the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Rayatz left Russia, she left Russia with the Rebbe. She was with the Rebbe in Riga. She was with the Rebbe in Poland. There were periods of time where everybody had traveled, and she was left alone. She didn't travel. The Frierdike Rebbe traveled. The Rebbe traveled. There's the new Igris that I talk so much about. You have occasions where the Rebbetzin Chayamushka went to Riga to be with the Alter Rebbetzin because the Frierdike Rebbe and his wife, her daughter-in-law, were away, and he didn't want her to be alone. And there's many letters where he writes to the Rebbe, I came back home and I found my wife and my mother in good health. And there's a famous letter called the Lange Brief, the long letter, which people didn't know about. But the way I understand it is the Frierdike Rebbe sent it to the Rebbe. It's never finished. Very, very long letter. It's a whole story about Reb Mordechai made Reb Chaim a chassid. These are the earliest chassidim in Rusland, in Weiss Rusland. Reb Mordechai and Reb Chaim and Reb Yisachar Ben. And it was a letter sent to the Rebbetzin, to our Rebbetzin, and she was in Poland. She was in Warsaw, at Watsk. So the Frierdike Rebbe says, give us the Baba to read. She'll enjoy it very much. And it won't take take a couple of days and she'll give it back to you. And that's what happened. And then, of course, when the war started, she was there also. She was petrified. She was hysterically afraid. But whenever she was next to the Frierdike Rebbe, she was totally calm. In other words, she knew that if she's around her son, the Rebbe, nothing adverse, nothing negative will occur, and she was visibly calm. And the moment they were separated, she was agitated. Bring me some zuna, I want to be with my son. And the Frierdike Rebbe was running from house to house. A house would blow up, and they would run to another house, or they would run out of a house, and then minutes later that house would be blown up. The Russians were dropping bombs on Varsha, and they were dropping bombs, just Germans, Yimach Shemam, were dropping bombs, of course, on the Jewish neighborhoods of Varsha, especially. In any case, then they traveled through Germany. You know that the Frierdike Rebbe traveled through Germany to Latvia, to Riga, he was a Latvian citizen. I don't know at what point, but at a certain point she fell and broke an arm, I think. And she was not able to travel. And the Frierdike Rebbe spent several months in Riga waiting for her to recover sufficiently to be able to travel. He wouldn't travel without his mother. And then, of course, they traveled to Stockholm. They took a ship, and they came to New York. Just the other day, somebody told me a story. I wish I could remember where. I remember where. At the Frierdike Rebbe was in Stockholm, Sweden. And there was a lot of people came to see him. And the Frierdike Rebbe was scheduled to leave the next day. So people said to the Rebbe, why don't you postpone your trip a few more days? So many people want to see you. And the Rebbe said, the Tatas Mamir Gerezin, my father came to me and he said, I have no more permission to stay. I have to leave right now. And he left the following day, and that was the very last ship that ever left from Stockholm. And the Rebbe came to New York with Nissen. And of course she traveled with him to New York, and she lived in 770 upstairs. Now before I continue, I wanted to share with you a very beautiful story which I saw recently in a Kuntris. The Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdike Rebbe, was not well. You read the Igros Kodesh, so much of his time and energy was devoted to dealing with his medical condition. It affected his capacity to be a Rebbe. He was constantly going to doctors and to centers of rehabilitation and so forth. And he was in Perkersdorf. Perkersdorf was a city near Vienna, in Austria, where Gedali Yisrael used to meet. It was a place of R&R. I think there were natural springs there, and all of Gedali Yisrael used to go there. And there were also the Talmidim used to come. It was they used to call it Yerushalayim of Europe. In the summertime, in Perkersdorf, all the Gedali Yisrael with their Talmidim. There were two villages, and they're very similar names, Perkesdorf and some other Esdorf, that they were close by, and the Rebbe would visit one or the other. As soon as, of course, the Germans occupied Austria, which is in 1938, that became impossible. So then he had to look for other places. He even thought about going to Hungary to court Arthur. But on one of those trips, the Mukatcher was there. The Mukatcher, Tzaddik. The Mukatcher passed away in Tzaddik Zayin. The Minchas Aloza, who was very close to the Rabbeim. And the Rebbeim had an incredible amount of derech eretz for him. The Rebbe and the Frierdike Rebbe had growled derech eretz. There are minhagim that our Rebbe does, different than the Frierdike Rebbe that are minhagim Mukatcher. The Minchas Aloza. I'm not going to say the minhagim Mukatcher, the minhagim of the Minchas Aloza. The Rebbeim had very high opinion of the Minchas Aloza. He was a very big goan and a very big tzaddik. He was a big kanoi, big fanatic, and he disagreed with the Rebbe on certain issues, but there was a gvaldik derech eretz. So the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara, the Frierdike Rebbe, comes home one morning and he says to his family that he has a meeting the next day with the Minchas Aloza. They're going to meet together and talk. So the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara says to the Frierdike Rebbe, Ich will zeir zen, I want to see him. So he tells her we're going to be walking on a particular route, on a particular road. So she went and hid behind a tree. And the Rebbe was walking with the Mukatcher. The Frierdike was already ill at the time, Mistame, so it was hard for him to walk. They probably walked quite slowly. And the Mukatcher stops at a certain point and says, I feel a ruach of Kedusha. I feel a Holy Spirit. So the Frierdike Rebbe tells him, the mama is hinted in boy. My mother's behind the tree. This is a story. The Mukatcher magic, when I feel a ruach of Kedusha, so the Frierdike Rebbe says, the mama is hinted in boy. She came to New York, and she lived with the Frierdike Rebbe here in America. She passed away Yud Gimel Shvat Tov Beis, 1942. And the story of her histalkus is remarkable. And it has a background. And the background is that when her shviga passed away, her mother-in-law passed away, the Rebbetzin Rivke, she and her husband, the Rebbe Rashab, were not in Russia. They were probably in France, in Menton. She passed away in 1914. SHVAT, Yud SHVAT. So you're talking about January 1914, Bepashtus. And the Frierdike Rebbe has a Rishima where he describes in detail his grandmother's illness. She got sick, and she was sick for almost a week, and she kept getting progressively worse, and he couldn't decide whether he should tell his father to come home or not. And on Thursday she was feeling better. So he sent his father a telegram that he doesn't have to come home. Friday morning he went into her, to his grandmother, and he was very close to his grandmother, very, very close. She had raised him. And he brought him a siddur to daven. And after davening, she asked for a glass of water, and she gave him her siddur to put on the mantle. And when he turned around, after putting the siddur down, I think she took a glass of water, she made a bracha, and she told him thank you. I think she said, these details maybe I'm forgetting. But when he put the siddur down, turned around, she was gone. She passed away, mamish ayin from the shikin. She died after davening, after making a shahakal levari, sitting in a chair. This was Friday afternoon. So the Frierdike Rebbe immediately made the levaya. The Frierdike Rebbe was very broken, terribly broken. It was a cold, wintry morning, and they crushed the levaya before Shabbos. I told this to you many times that walking back from the levaya, he muttered to himself, "The crown from the mashpacha is up. The crown of the family was lifted. A guest in Gan Eden of Shabbos, a guest in Gan Eden for Shabbos." What the Frierdike Rebbe said to himself. He sent his father 3 telegrams. One was that his mother is not well. The second was that his mother is very, very terribly ill, Goishes says. And the third telegram was there's nothing to come home for. If Motzei Shabbos, the Rebbe got on a train and he traveled to meet his parents where they were, to Menachem Avel, his father, and to give her the details of what happened in the Levaya and so forth. When he reported to his parents how she passed away, his father and his mother were together. And his mother got so excited, she clapped her hands and said, Halavai b'mi razoi. I wish this should be by me. And it happened exactly the same way. Her son was not in New York. The only time the Frierdike Rebbe left his mother, he went to Chicago, Bika Chicago. And our Rebbe was here. She passed away not on Friday, but on Shabbos. The Rebbe passed away Erev Shabbos. The Rebbe passed away Shabbos. And the Rebbe was upstairs. She was in the middle of davening. She was holding nishmas. And she didn't feel well. She asked for a glass of water. The Rebbe brought her a glass of water. And again, this isn't the Rebbe's Rishimis, but I read it when it came out. I believe the Rebbe actually gave her a bracha. And then she passed away on Shabbos. The Rebbe Rayatz was in Chicago. and the Rabbanim paskent that they should postpone the Levaya so that he could stay in Chicago an extra day and continue being Makabel Yidden to Yechidus. And he came back Eresh Monday. The Rebbe Devaila went on Sunday and put down a down payment of $1,000 for the plot of Agudas Chasidei Chabad, the cemetery in Montefiore, because there was already a chelk in Staten Island, and it was decided to buy a new plot in Montefiore. The plan, there's two reasons that I heard. One is that they expected the Frierdike Rebbe to go, and Staten Island would have been going across a body of water, and they didn't want that. I heard another ring of Maisim, a watershed, that apparently the cemetery in Staten Island was in a very, very muddy, a swampy place. I read this someplace, I don't know what it means, and they didn't want to put the Rebbetzin in such a place. So they bought the chelk in Queens. The Frierdike didn't even go to the Levaya. They didn't let him go to the Levaya. The doctors didn't allow him to go to the Levaya. In other words, the Levaya was held for him. They bought the cemetery in anticipation of his participating in the Levaya, and the Pele didn't even go to the cemetery. He was never by his mother's tziyun. It was built, it was designed, he should be able to go, but he never went. And he used to send pidyenis. The Frierdike was an unbelievably emotional person. Unbelievably emotional. It's hard to fathom. When the Rebbe got emotional, his whole body would tremble. And they worried about his health. And it was decided that he cannot afford to go to the Rebbe's, his mother's tziyun, because the emotions pashat would be maybe too much pashat for his physical tolerance. That's how sick he was. But he would send pidyenis to the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara's tziyun, and he would write on the pidyenis, Ano le'rachem ram avuri, u'kfi hatzettel, she'ekla ekra bechedri. And according to the details of the zettel, I'm going to read my own shtibel. He didn't want to give people to read his whole inyanim, but he would give a short note and say that the rest of the information I'm going to read in my room. This is Rebbetzin Shterna Sara. She passed away in Tafshin Beis, 1942. She had the very same histalkus, the mamish, the same exact histalkus of her mother-in-law, and this is Menuchas HaKavod. This is the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara. If you've been to the oil, you'll see that she's in between the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka and the Rebbetzin Nechamadina, which is why if you look at the Rebbe's tziyun, there's a space between the Frierdike Rebbe's tziyun and the Rebbe's tziyun. There's an empty space. And in Das Tachten, the reason there's an empty space is because they're buried opposite their wives. The Rebbetzin Nechamadina is feet to feet with the Rebbe Rayatz. They're opposite one another. The Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka is also the same thing. The Rebbetzin Shterna Sara is between the two of them. So the opposite them in the Ezras Anoshim, there's an empty space. This is the Rebbetzin Shterna Sara, the Frierdike Rebbe's mother. And Versteht, she was a Rebbetzin, she was involved in all kinds of things. She was involved in Kupas Bachurim. Anything good that was going on, she was involved with.